I also join the other panelists in thanking the government of Armenia and ORF for convening us. Africa, as you've mentioned, is home to great biodiversity. And Africa is alive to the triple planetary crisis, which encompasses climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. Africa, for the record, does not subscribe to the gospel of climate denialism, because we believe that science tells us the truth, that our climate is changing, and as a result, we are losing our biodiversity. Most African nations have been signatories to the main conventions on climate change and biodiversity. I think more than 90% of African nations are signatories to the UNFCCC, the Convention on Climate Change, and African nations, most of them have become signatories to the Convention on Biological Diversity. It means that most of our countries have come up with nationally determined contributions, national climate action plans, and of late, a number of countries have been coming up with biodiversity strategy and action plans. Africa is a continent with 55 nations. So sometimes it's very difficult to talk about an African position on issues. But generally, the African position is espoused by the African Union. And the African Union has come up with a biodiversity strategy, and the African Union has also come up with a climate change and resilience plan. And that binds the member nations to be able to cascade and come up with individual country initiatives. Let me come to biodiversity. And I want to congratulate Armenia for getting the right to host COP17 next year. Nairobi, Kenya, where I come from, is a seat of the United Nations Environment Program. And when delegates came from Montreal, there was a subsidiary body conversation in Nairobi, which gave further definition and framed issues for COP17. And so Nairobi, Kenya, and Africa has been a significant contributor to this conversation and enrichment of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The lack of ambition, and I think, let me say this applies to biodiversity and applies to climate change, is that one of the things that we must avoid when we come to COP17 in Yerevan, God willing, next year, is to move away from the talking shop arrangement of past conferences of parties. I've had the privilege of attending a few conferences of parties, particularly on climate change, and the African view is that some of these COPs are becoming extensive talking shops with very little action and with very little ambitions. Sometimes the conferences of parties have become fora for compliance and filling forms and templates, rather than fora where people can take away serious action. And I want to encourage that when we come to Yerevan next year, from the perspective of African countries and from the experiences we have had with the UNFCCC, when there was the last COP on biodiversity, and I think that was in Cali, yeah? There was a conversation around digital sequence information. There were conversations around funds that needed to be established to ensure that there was global support for biodiversity measures. I know under the Global Environment Facility, a global biodiversity fund has been mooted, and a digital sequenced information fund has also been mooted. It was called the Kali Fund. I hope that we'll come up with a Yerevan dialogue or a Yerevan consensus that will provide proper regulations for these funds, that will provide clarity on access mechanisms. We can learn a lot of lessons from the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, the Loss and Damage Fund, which have been part of conversations in the climate change COPs. We have established these funds, but we have put up very restrictive access mechanisms. I know you have asked me about practical experience. Just last year, through the parliamentary network, we were able to access some funding from the Green Climate Fund. It was not very substantial. It was just about $1 million for capacity building of members of parliament in Kenya. Recent events have shown us that if you exclude politicians from the conversations, then the people, through populism, can elect somebody who then subscribes to his own version of facts and his own version of science. But the process of accessing funds from the GCF, I can tell you, is like what they say in the Bible, a camel going through the eye of a needle. And so out of Yerevan, I hope that we'll come up with proper structures and regulations to allow the nations that need to access these funds, particularly the small island states. There's also concern about the role of indigenous communities. Indigenous communities have largely been the curators, they've been the guardians, they've been the conservators of biodiversity in many places, be it in Europe, in the Americas, in Africa. Whenever we go for the climate change conferences, there is always a section that is set aside for indigenous communities. And I am sorry to say that they are expected to be dramatic, they are expected to picket and to hold up placards, but I rarely see them in the negotiating rooms. I hope that in Yerevan, we will welcome, will acknowledge, and will embrace indigenous communities because they possess a lot of knowledge. That knowledge is what we are saying needs to be monetized. We have an example in my country, Kenya, of a giant pharma company that went to the soda lakes of the Rift Valley and were able to extract certain enzymes that were then replicated and used in manufacture of bleach. If you put on faded jeans, there is an agent that came from Kenya that is used to give effect to the faded jeans effect. There was nothing that trickled back to the indigenous communities that have been curators and guardians and conservators of that knowledge over the years. And that is why we hope that Yerevan is going to give effect to a proper funding mechanism so that it can also trickle back to the indigenous communities. I know I can't say much, but there's also the issue of, I think, the drivers to biodiversity loss, invasive alien species. I have very, immediate example. Lake Victoria is Africa's largest freshwater lake. And when the colonial masters, the British, came to Kenya, they introduced a fish species called the Nile perch. The Nile perch is a giant of a fish. It can grow up to 200 kilos, can grow as long as 7 feet. Now the Nile perch became the bully of the lake, eating anything and everything in its path and in its sight. The only bigger animal in the lake beside the Nile perch is a crocodile and the hippo. And the hippo doesn't eat fish, and the crocodile also has a low appetite for fish. And so as a result of the introduction of the Nile perch, a lot of biodiversity in the lake has been lost. Now, how do the local community get compensated? How do we ensure that there is justice for the local community who have faced biodiversity loss as a result of an alien species that was deliberately introduced and it can be traced? So I think just to summarize, out of the climate change conversations, which is tied to the biodiversity conversation, we would like to see, particularly as Africa, greater action, less talk, greater commitment, particularly by those nations or states that have unduly benefited from activities that have made our climate or have made our globe less livable. But it would be unconscionable from an African perspective, it would be unjust, it would be improper that our parents and grandparents bequeath unto us certain biodiversity that will not be able to pass it on to the next generation. That will be a great failure of this generation.
What is the last word that you would like to put forward for the upcoming COP17? Thank you.
Thank you. It's noteworthy that the US, the largest economy, is not a signatory to the UNFCCC, and it's also not a signatory to the Biodiversity Convention. I just want to urge countries in the global south that when we come to Yerevan next year, we come confident that we can be able to come up with solutions. You talked about small island states, and they have immense biodiversity because they've been separated from the pervasive effects of humanity. But the plight of small island states, they cannot solve them themselves because there's a lot of interdependence. If there's global temperature rise, a small island state cannot mitigate or cannot take action against that on its own. So yes, we can talk about self-dependence, we can talk about budgets, but it requires global action. And that is why in the climate change space, we made a lot of push for the loss and damage fund. Now the loss and damage fund is probably 2 years old, and still there is no great clarity on its access and its utilization. And we hope that when the climate change community goes to Brazil later in the year, there'll be clarity on that. Now that is also another problem, that we have quite a number of frameworks with overlapping mandates and objectives. So you've got a framework on climate change, a framework on biodiversity, you've got a COP on desertification, and then you've got UN conferences on sustainable development. Now, I don't know how you can discuss sustainable development without discussing biodiversity or without discussing climate change. So we must find a way of building synergies between these many multilateral environmental agreements. And I like the conversation that is ongoing at the United Nations about, bringing agencies closer together. And I hope that a number of those agencies will come to Nairobi to sit alongside the United Nations Environment Program. In Kenya, we have an interesting success story called the Northern Rangelands Trust, where we are combining climate change adaptation, we are combining biodiversity preservation and packaging that, and we've been able to go to the carbon credit market. Now, Northern Rangelands Trust has set aside thousands of hectares of pasture, and so there's the carbon sequestration part of it, there's biodiversity preservation part of it, but the local community, the local Maasai community, are able to get certain benefits come to them because we are selling carbon credits to the global market. Now, there is also some injustice, because if carbon credit, or if carbon is a product, then a product needs to have a standard price. You know what the price of an iPhone is, whether you are in this country or you are in another country, the price is standard. But you'll find that African carbon sometimes goes to the market for as low as $20 per ton, whereas European carbon goes to the market at about $80 per ton. And I know this is one of the outstanding issues in the UNFCCC, the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, making sure that there's justice, there's consistency, there's uniformity in the carbon markets. Let me conclude by talking about the gender dimension. Our experience is that when you let women take charge of biodiversity and environmental conservation issues, they tend to do a better job than men. So we need to bring women into the conversation, young people into the conversation, indigenous communities into the conversation. Last week I launched a report on indigenous communities. There's a community called the Ilchamus. It's a Maasai community. They know which plants to use to cure a snake bite. But modern medicine, antivenom must be stored in an environment between 2 degrees and 8 degrees centigrade. So you go to hospital, you can't find antivenom. But within the indigenous communities, they know which herbs to swallow and mix. And so the conversation around biodiversity protection must also go with the curation of the knowledge that goes with it. And that's why we are talking about DSI and making sure that the DSI fund that is established, there's clear guidelines and clear procedures to ensure that that woman with the indigenous and traditional knowledge of mixing antivenom gets a benefit. Because once the big farmers get that knowledge or that secret, they're going to package it and it's going to be big. And I think the only reason why the US is not part of these conventions is because of intellectual property. They know that most of their big pharma corporations have gotten rich at the expense of indigenous communities.
Thank you, Moses.
Displayed as a leadership. The tribalism that we have been expressing and calling it shareholding. Shareholding is nothing when it comes to national politics. It is pure tribalism. It is ethnic jingoism. It is ethnic chauvinism. Mr. Speaker, we are talking here with Senator Omtata, asking ourselves, why do you need a voter's card when you already have a national ID? And that has been the system in this country, to disenfranchise certain parts of this country. We have been around through electoral processes, and we know that the registration of voters is a first step for rigging of elections. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the majority and minority leaders that in that motion, that we should push to ensure that in this country, once you have a national ID card, then you can automatically become a voter. Because I've heard the arrogant politicians, those who voted yes to the finance bill last week, saying that Gen Zs will not take them anywhere because, after all, they are not registered as voters. Once you are a citizen, you've got a right to vote. And we should not introduce additional bureaucracies in the name of registration of voters. The last time we did that exercise, this country spent 7 billion Kenya shillings on biometric voter registration equipment. Those are the areas where we could make savings. If we could take that 7 billion that I am sure that the IBC is going to ask for another round of voter registration, that amount of money can take care of the doctors, can take care of the junior secondary school teachers. Mr. Speaker, we have annoyed the Gen Zs by our fake religious fervor. The religious fundamentalism that is in this country, Mr. Speaker, where we go to churches, and then we say that the persons we vanquished are children of a lesser God, that the victors are the ones who pray to the true God. Today, Gen Zs have told us that the voice of the youth is a voice of God. Mr. Speaker, I've reflected and I've looked at what Wole Soyinka wrote. I think it was Soyinka who wrote The Trouble with Nigeria. And Soyinka said, it was Chinua Achebe. It was Achebe who did the Trouble with Nigeria. He said, there is no problem with the Nigerian land, the Nigerian soil, the Nigerian air, the Nigerian water, the Nigerian seas and lakes. The trouble with Nigeria, as is the trouble with Kenya, is the failure of leadership. It is a cult of mediocrity. It is indiscipline and it is corruption. Mr. Speaker, ever since Achebe made those very, very interesting remarks more than 20, 30 years ago, Kenya has not learned a lesson. I am so happy about this revolution that our young people have brought upon us, because it is going to change the architecture of our politics. Before, the people who mattered were the leaders and owners of parties. Today, the true bosses are the youngsters, the Gen Zs, our brothers and sisters, our sons and daughters. Mr. Speaker, I heard the president say that he wants to set up certain committees to go around the country to find out what the youth want. But why do you ask for a job when you don't know what the people who elected you want, Mr. Speaker? And sometimes we can propose a lot of things, and yet the solutions lie here in this Constitution. We have a chapter or an article, Article 55 of the Constitution, which talks about specific application of rights with respect to youth. And so instead of the president wasting taxpayers' money with another BBI like SACAS, I invite the president to read Article 55. That says the state shall take measures, including affirmative action programs, to ensure that the youth access relevant education and training, have opportunities to associate, be represented, and to participate in political, social, economic, and other spheres of life, that the youth can access employment, and that they are protected from harmful cultural practices and exploitation. You don't need a committee to go around the country to come and tell you that, because the framers of our Constitution already put it there. What do the Gen Z want, Mr. Speaker? The Gen Z wants us to be faithful to this Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, the rights and fundamental freedoms in this Constitution, which belong to each individual and are not granted by the state. And the responsibility of the state, as far as the rights are concerned, is to observe, to respect, protect, promote, and to fulfill the realization of those rights. Why do you have to set up committees and dialogue teams? And yet, in the Constitution, it says every Kenyan has got a right to life. That right to life is not abortion. Those boys who are felled by snipers outside this parliament, we have violated their right to life. The young people want equality and freedom from discrimination. That is an obligation of the state in this Constitution. It should not matter whether you are chariot, whether you are karaoke, for you to access jobs. The other day, I'm watching on TV as leadership of KEFIS, Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Scheme, are talking about a new system that they've launched. The first person to speak sounds like he comes from Meru. The second person to speak sounds like he comes from Meru. The third one to speak sounds like he comes from Meru. The Minister for Agriculture is a former senator for Meru. It should not matter where you come from, because I don't think that plant health inspectorate services, the expertise only resides in a certain part of the country. But that has been duplicated in each and every ministry. You go to the ICT ministry, everyone perhaps is Otieno, Onyango, Odongo. You go to another ministry of roads, everyone is
Senator
Cheriot.
Fomeru, Senator Kajwang just yield. Senator Fomeru, we agreed before. Just take a seat. Just take a seat. We agreed before. I'm talking Senator Kathuri. We agreed as a ground rule that there shall be no points of order. Now, there's a reason for that. And honorable senators, to get a boil to heal, you don't caress it. If you need the boil to heal, you must squeeze it really hard. Now, that process of squeezing is pretty painful. But if we need to get out of this place where we are, we just have to squeeze this boil. So, Senator Kathuri, I will give you an opportunity where you're going to lay your case and nobody is going to raise a point of order on you. Conclude, Senator Kajwang.
Mr. Speaker, when dry bones are mentioned in a proverb, some people feel jittery. I am talking about the rights and fundamental freedoms that are in the Constitution. Every Kenyan deserves a right to work in public. And that is what the young people are asking for. They are asking for human dignity to be observed. Our people want to be treated properly, like human beings. They don't want to be treated like animals, like we have seen out there in the streets. Our people, our young people, want freedom of conscience, religion, belief, and opinion. They want freedom of expression. They want freedom of association, freedom to assemble, to demonstrate, to picket and petition, and not to be greeted by bullets. Mr. Speaker, when we talk about 39 people dead, it's as if we are counting heaps of logs of firewood. These are children of people. There's a mother somewhere shedding tears today, Mr. Speaker. There is a father somewhere talking about the lost opportunities as a result of a young person doing what he was told he can do comfortably under this Constitution. When you talk about the 39, we are talking about Ibrahim Kamau. Ibrahim Kamau had just left high school, Mr. Speaker. He was felled by a sniper outside this parliament. He was killed within the presence of parliament. We are talking about David Chege, a computer science graduate from Jomo Kenyatta University, felled by a sniper's bullet outside this parliament. The blood has not died in the grass of parliament. We are talking about Eric Shieni, a university student. We are talking about Evans Kiratu, who was killed by a tear gas when tear gas exploded on him. We are talking about Rex Kanyike, Brian Kasaine. Gen Z are saying, grant us the rights that are due to us in the Constitution. More importantly, Gen Zs are demanding that the economic and social rights that are granted unto them in this Constitution and which belong to them, it's not granted by the state. The duty of the state is to fulfill it. These rights belong to the Gen Zs and to the people of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, you don't need a committee of rocket scientists. You don't need a committee of experts. You don't need people from the United Nations to come and interpret for you this Constitution. The answers to the problems are all here. Gen Zs are saying, let us ensure that Chapter 6 of this Constitution is observed and fulfilled, because we have made leadership, and particularly political office, an opportunity to lord over other people and not to serve them. Mr. Speaker, I believe that if the government sat back and reflected, they would realize that all the answers and all the solutions are here. I want to propose further, Mr. Speaker, as we craft this motion and as the leader of majority brings further amendments. I am particularly disturbed when I see the military walking around the streets of Nairobi. Mr. Speaker, we have seen what has happened in neighboring countries. Let us not tempt our military. Let us keep them in the barracks. Let them do the spectacular job they have always done of defending and protecting this nation from external aggression. When you bring the military to the streets, it is like exposing a child to sugar or a child to honey. It has been seen before, it has happened before. South Sudan, Maine, Mr. Speaker. Sudan was a big economy. It was booming. The agricultural sector, the petroleum and mining sector was booming. Sudan is now in shambles. Ethiopia, Mr. Speaker. Ethiopia was an economy that was competing with Kenya. It was poised to overtake Kenya. Safaricom went into Ethiopia, and Kenyan banks and insurance companies wanted to go into Ethiopia. It was messed up by the military. Our resolution, despite what the High Court has done and what the National Assembly did, let the military take the tanks back to the barracks. That should be a resolution of this House. Number two, Mr. Speaker, I have heard some instances of sibling rivalry. Because the Senate is sitting and the National Assembly is in hiding, there are people who are saying, scrap the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell those who say scrap the Senate that we've got a good record as a Senate. We have referred 146 cases to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. And Mr. Speaker, out of the 146 cases, very few of them have been investigated or prosecuted to the final conclusion. And we have told EACC we are going to bring them here before the Committee of the Whole. And Mr. Speaker, I want to tell Gen Z, please pay EACC a visit. There is a problem there. You guys need to go and visit and say hello to the EACC because we have a problem. Mr. Speaker, this House, in terms of accountability, has impeached at least 5 governors. That is 10% of the counties. Can our brothers tell us how many ministers they have impeached? This House has gone to the Supreme Court to seek opinions that has developed jurisprudence in this nation. This House in unison marched to Milimani. And Mr. Speaker, in our march to Milimani, the late Senator Haji, the Senator Gideon Moi, the senators that you could not imagine were the ones who were leading our march to Milimani on the concurrence matter. Mr. Speaker, this Senate has taken its services and its sittings out of Nairobi. And I think we've gone to 4 counties. This Senate has organized legislative conferences and devolution conferences. They should tell us the last time the National Assembly sat outside Nairobi. But it does not matter, Mr. Speaker, because in the end, the difference between us and them is like the difference between a cheetah and a leopard. And in my community, we have one name for both. And so it does not matter whether we voted yes or no. We are all collectively in this. Mr. Speaker, the SRC matter has been dealt with, and I think perhaps what we should have said is that what should have gone to MPs as a salary increment should be redirected to a certain course, perhaps the course of doctors or the course of the junior secondary school teachers. I would like in this motion, Mr. Speaker, for the majority leader to include another action, that the Cabinet Secretary to the Treasury, Professor Njuguna, who has the habit of snubbing the Senate every time we invite him, to invoke Article 225 on any county executive that gets an adverse opinion. What Article 225 talks about is that 50% of funds are withheld until the county comes up with a recovery action plan. And Mr. Speaker, 10% of the money we send to counties is wasted. Not stolen, wasted. Utilized on things that are not necessary. And all our budgets at a national level, 10% is wasted. Mr. Speaker, I want that motion to direct that we go towards a digital government. There are so many meetings that we hold that do not require people to be in the same room. We can do Zoom, we can use virtual technologies, and the Commission should tell us, when there was COVID, they told us we were procuring a system to facilitate virtual parliament. Why are we still using Zoom, which cannot work properly and can be hacked? So we must drive towards a digital government. Mr. Speaker, on constitutional commissions, Senator Omtata has made a strong case. We must demand that we are part of Parliament and we must be involved in allocation of budgets to constitutional commissions. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, Mr. Speaker, is being overshadowed by the Law Society of Kenya. And I want to congratulate the leadership of the Law Society of Kenya. They have stood up for the rights of persons who are involved in this protest. They have done better than the Constitutional Commission that is supposed to guarantee observance of human rights in this republic. They have done better than the Commission on Administration of Justice. The last time I heard my friend and sister, the Ombudsman, speak, she was speaking about Muguka. She was not talking about the rights of people and maladministration in this country, which is supposed to be her duty. I hope Gen Zs can also pay her a visit. Mr. Speaker, the National Gender and Equalization Commission is not doing what they should be doing. I hope they can also be paid a visit. Mr. Speaker, I want to...
Senator Kajwang, 2 minutes to wind up your thought.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was about to suggest that they pay you a visit, but you have...
With that, can you take your seat? Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, we shall protect you. And Mr. Speaker, I conclude by supporting and thanking Senator Aaron Cheriot and Senator Mazzaya for this motion. Let us stand for this country. Let us do the right things. If this country burns, Mr. Speaker, we have nowhere to go. You have seen the frustration and the problems our brothers and sisters from South Sudan face. Sudan is in fire. Ethiopia is burning. Our neighboring countries are in problems. The Democratic Republic of Congo is on the precipice. Even Rwanda itself is on the precipice. We cannot afford to go that route. And the person who takes us to that route, Mr. Speaker, will not be the Gen Z. It will be us in office. It will be the wickedness in high places. It will be the principalities and powers that reside in State House, that reside in this Senate, and that reside in the National Assembly that will take us there. If we are the problem, then the Gen Zs have all legitimate rights to kick us out. But let us smell the coffee, let us wake up before it gets too late. I believe that Kenya can be redeemed. Mr. Speaker, I support.
Senator Roba.